We're talking about the gymnosperms and the angiosperms. This was, as we've said, a real advancement in plant technology because they figured out how to do seeds. We're going to talk a little bit more about seeds in a moment. But in the meantime, we've started talking now about the flowering plants. And the flowering plants are called angiosperms. Gymnosperm meant naked seed. Angiosperms, the seeds are no longer naked, they're in ovaries. Yeah, plants have ovaries. Well, flowering plants have ovaries. And we have more efficient pollination. One of the things that you're going to need to be able to do is to identify the parts of a typical flower. A typical flower. Flowers are fascinating on their own. Each one is its own little creation. But in general, we have got these parts of a flower. The male parts of the flower are the stamen. Okay, and the stamen is divided up into the anther. I know it sounds like I'm saying answer wrong, but the anther, and the anther contains the structures that are making pollen, right, which is going to contain the male gametophyte. Yeah, no, the yes, the male gametophyte. And then these things called filaments. And the filaments are just designed to hold the anthers up away from the ovary. Then we have got the female parts, and the female parts can get called the carpel or the pistil. Okay, so stamen for male, I don't know how to remember that. Carpel or pistil is female. And the carpel or pistil is divided up into these parts. There is an ovary in all the flowering plants. This long stem kind of thing is called the style, and the stigma is the place where pollen will arrive, and it is designed to be sticky, so the pollen that gets put there will stay there, right? So stigma, style, ovary. In the ovary, we will find the ovule. Ovules are just out in the open when it comes to like the gymnosperms, right? They're naked. Here in a flowering plant, the ovule is hidden inside of the ovary. There are some other parts of the plants as well. There are flower petals, which are very often colorful. We'll talk about that in a moment. And then there are these green leaf-like structures that are called sepals. So sepals are not petals. Petals, you probably would have known them as flower petals, so don't overthink that. These are the parts of a flower that you need to know. And you need to know which are male and which are female parts of the flower. Okay, let's see. Anther is going to make the pollen. The stigma is going to grab the pollen. One of the things I'd like you to notice is that in general, it's going to be on a quiz. In general, the anthers are lower than the stigma. And it is for the same reason that the gymnosperms put the female cones above the male cones. It's because just like those guys, we would really prefer not to pollinate ourselves, right? We would like our pollen to go fertilize the flower on the next plant, and we would like someone else's pollen to fertilize our seeds, because sexual reproduction really does have that many advantages. So the reason that the stigma generally sticks out of the flower more than the pollen is because, than the anthers, is because we want pollen from another plant to get onto our stigma and our pollen to go elsewhere. So imagine if you are a flower that gets pollinated by bees, okay? So here comes a bee, and the bee has just visited another flower and it's covered with pollen. On its way to get its reward of nectar, it is going to brush past the stigma, leave some of that flower's pollen on the stigma, and as it goes down in, it's going to get this pollen on its little furry bee back. It gets its little nectar reward and it flies out, right? So that's the reason why the stigma sits up higher than the rest. Okay, now I think we've got another picture of the model we use in lab. These are the sepals, okay? Let's see. The flower petals are pink. The anthers are these guys. This would be the filament. Here we've got the stigma, the style, and this is the ovary, and inside of the ovary, there is the ovule. Now, let's talk about what's going to happen in the life cycle of a flowering plant. You can see that there is some pollen up here on the surface. Those guys are going to start growing, and they're going to be the male gametophytes, right? Now, they are haploid, and they're such tiny little generation, you'd need a microscope to see them. But they are multicellular, and they grow, 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 grow. And you see that yellow line? Grow, 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 grow. And when they get here, and they're like, yay, we found the ovule, then they will send the male gamete to unite with the female gamete there inside of the ovule. So it's like a dramatically reduced gametophyte generation, but it's still there, still alternation of generations. Oh, good, this describes it much more better. So if we look real closely, we've got the pollen landing on the stigma, and then the pollen grain, that's the male gametophyte, will start to grow. It does become multicellular, and it grows on down the style, grows all the way until it gets to the female gametophyte. Then it's going to send its little, I guess it's still considered a sperm, but it's not swimming at this point. And then there will be fertilization. Once there's fertilization, now we're going to see in more detail the development of seeds here in our angiosperms, although the development of seeds is not that different when it comes to the gymnosperms. When you have got the egg and sperm united, you've got yourself something called a zygote, okay? And the zygote is going to turn into a little tiny embryo inside the seed and wait, like the sleeping baby Kal-El in Superman, right? And he is being sent off in this thing called a seed. And we're going to see how angiosperms not only tricked animals into becoming their pollinators, so they don't have to make very much pollen anymore, but plants also are tricking animals to disperse their seeds. These seeds are very resistant to drying out. Some of them very resistant, like can resist drying out for like decades, and they can be carried long distances by animals. We'll talk about that, and then they will lie in the soil, maybe over the entire winter while it's frozen, and then only wake up in springtime and grow into a little baby plant in springtime. Okay, so there still is an alternation of generations, but now it's microscopically small. So the gametophytes used to be these guys. They were the plant that you saw. That was the gametophyte. Now what the gametophyte is, it starts out in this pollen, it becomes a little bit multicellular, but still microscopically small, and that is now the gametophyte. So it's really changed. Let's look a little bit more at seeds. Usually when we meet in real life, we get to dissect a seed. Seeds have embryos. I know it's weird to apply it to a plant, but yes, that baby plant that's inside of every seed is called an embryo. And it also has something called endosperm. The endosperm is the general term for all of the starchy, it's mostly starchy, but some protein stuff that's packed into a seed that is going to be the food source for the embryo before the embryo starts photosynthesizing itself. Remember, if you were a fern, You're just a naked spore, and you just got to start. If you become a gametophyte, you just got to start making stuff and photosynthesizing right away. You're really on your own. But seeds are the mother plant's way of packing a whole bunch of care package in with that embryo, so that embryo can actually grow in total darkness for a while because it has this food source to rely on. By the way, the reason that so much of what we eat comes in the form of beans and seeds is because we also can eat the protein and the carbohydrate that has been packed away in that endosperm. When we are eating beans and seeds, we are accessing the endosperm that the plant packaged for its embryo. And you can easily see the embryo inside of a lima bean seed. So if you've got lima beans, just dry lima beans sitting in your kitchen cabinet, you can take one of those, you put them in water overnight and let them hydrate. And then they've got a coat around them. That coat comes off pretty easily. And after that, it's very easy to split them in half. Okay. And then it would look like this. Okay. And it looks like a little tiny baby palm tree. So let me show you. Do you see how it's got this little leaf and that little leaf? Those are embryonic leaves. Those are going to be the very first leaves that this baby plant um, grows. And here is the embryonic root. And while it's in darkness, these things, once it decides to germinate and start growing, those things can use all of this energy called endosperm in order to let that little embryo grow. This seed here has been split apart and then treated with iodine. And remember, iodine turns starch, that dark purple, blue, black color, and that's why it looks like that. Now, cotyledons. Yeah, cotyledons are much more complicated than we're going to talk about in this class. But in some plants, there are two cotyledons, and in some plants, there's only one cotyledon. Plants that have got two cotyledons are called dicots, and plants that have one cotyledon are called monocots. Remember, mono means one, that's why monoecious, one house, meaning male and female on one tree. Dicots like dioecious, two, right? So there are two cotyledons on dicots, and let me show you what those look like. Now, in the bean or seed, these things are the two cotyledons. For the longest time, I just said, no, that's the endosperm. But in dicots, the cotyledons contain the endosperm. In monocots, the endosperm is separate from the cotyledon, and that's a detail that you might need to know if you're taking botany. Okay. So here is a lima bean that has started germinating, and you can see that the endosperm is getting used up, and so it's kind of shriveling and going away. This embryonic leaf is not growing very much yet, and you can see that the embryonic root is really starting to grow, and pretty soon it is going to do something like this. This is not a lima bean. This is a different kind of plant, but the very first leaf-like structures that a dicot has are those cotyledons. So the things that once contained the endosperm gets used up, but they become the very first little photosynthetic leaves to start generating nutrition so the plant can grow. And now this plant, it's not a lima bean. It has got a very unique kind of leaf structure that you can see there. All right, so the seeds are carrying this package of nutrition for the little baby plant that is yet to be born. We'll start there at the beginning of the next video.